Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mental Health and First. I can't even talk. Mental Health and Healing. I'm like Mental Health and First Aid. Mental Health and Healing. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to everyone who has been following us on this series. Welcome to everyone who is new. We are happy to have you here as we provide you tools to fill your healing box. Make sure, because this is a very amazing topic that we're having today, make sure you let people know that we're going to talk about healing adolescent and parental relationships, because I'm pretty sure you know a few people who would love to get in on this conversation. And so when I say conversation, that's exactly what I mean. As we continue to move forward, if you have questions, please drop them in the comments and we will answer them as we go. Today, I am absolutely honored to have beautiful Tracie Hall-Burks with us this evening, and she is going to introduce herself. Welcome, Miss Tracie.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Tracie Hall-Burks, as you can see, a licensed clinical social worker. And I'm excited to talk to you guys about healing in adolescent and parental relationships. I have been in the field, in the social services field, for over 19 years, doing a lot of work with youth and families. More specifically, my specialty is working with adolescent girls and women who suffer from depression. I've done so many different roles here in Sacramento County, as well as outside of Sacramento County. I started my career actually in Virginia, working in a residential treatment facility. Eventually came to California, did some work in the Bay Area, and then have been in Sacramento since 2005, helping our youth and families here in Sacramento. So I am excited to be with you all. And this is my first presentation, obviously, with you guys in interaction. And this is actually my first interaction as a doctorate in behavioral health. I passed my dissertation today, so yay, I'm excited. But I'm excited for us to get this conversation started.
Yes. Okay. So the first thing we probably want to look at is just to even start this conversation with teen development, because as a parent, we're looking at our children and we're like, you are changing, your responses are changing, and things that we think are not that serious are serious to them and maybe even traumatic to them. So what we got for them today on that?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about it. We know that our kids start changing as early as like 9 years old. And that's like really early, because at 9, they're still like in grade school. They're not even in middle school yet, but they start the changes. And so, every child is different. Some start earlier, some start later. But obviously, the things that we initially start to notice is we start to notice some mood swings. We start to notice the hair growth. We start to notice the smells. Right? We start to notice the smells. And we're like, wait a minute, you don't smell like that little kid anymore.
Right.
Obviously, for adolescent girls, they eventually start their menstrual cycle. So you have all these different things that start to happen. And when we look at teen development, some of the things that people really don't know, they always know the physical things, right? Because you can visually see them, right? So they start to develop, they get taller, girls start to develop hips, boys get taller, their voice starts to change, all of those things that you see. But then a lot of times, the only thing that we realize for their mental development, psychological development, is that they have what we would call like an attitude. But not realizing that because of the surge of hormones, there's a lot that's going on for them. Lots of thoughts, lots of feelings, lots of emotions, which is why they can be happy one time at one point in time, and then not happy at another point in time. And it just kind of up and flows. Oh, I think I've lost you, Nicole. You guys hang on. hope you guys are still there.
Keep going. I'm sorry. Yeah, you did.
Okay. Yes, okay.
Yes, no.
About the fact that we notice the physical developmental changes, but there's also a psychological change that happens with them. And that's how come we see the attitudes. That's how come 1 minute they're super happy and then all of a sudden they like have all these mood swings and we're like, what's going on? Like they're losing it.
Right.
And the reality of it is they really are.
They are.
This is why it's so important to talk about it, right? So that we as parents, I'm a parent myself, we can be a little bit more sensitive to that because they don't necessarily have control over it.
And you know, we get so agitated, and I say we because let's just be honest. I have a son. He is going to be 13 in September. And I'm like, listen, here, man, child.
Right.
Can you please pull it all together? And even as a person who is educated on the changes in development, it is a struggle sometimes. Your girl's not even gonna lie. It is a whole struggle sometimes.
Yes, and I completely agree. I have one of each. My 15-year-old is a son, my 12-year-old is a daughter. So I have two. I have two that are going through changes. So I have one that's in this place of what I call the prime time, from the age of as early as 9, 10 years old to 14. That's their prime time. That's when their hormones are not stable at all. So that's when you see a lot more of those mood swings. Mm-hmm. When they start to get about 14 and older, 14, 18, that's when you start seeing them now become like recluse spiders where you never see them. Now they're in the room all the time.
Yes.
Right? So you don't get as much as that, but that 10 to 14 range is really difficult. And yes. A lot of my clients that I see, that's really the time where they're really struggling with mm-hmm. their teenagers is during that time when those hormones are really imbalanced.
Okay. So now that we have somewhat of an understanding as to, and that age range is very specific and very interesting, right?
Yes.
I find that that's the time that they want us to stay away, but it's probably the time that we need to be more close to answer questions that they may have and hold conversations with them so that they're all right and they know, hey, I'm going through something. I don't understand it, but if I have someone to talk to, I can ask questions if I need. And again, they kind of want us to stay away, but what do you think about that?
Right. So I think that is such an important piece. And I think that kind of leads us into like the piece in regards to like the social problems that they have. Mm-hmm. Because obviously we know when they're younger, they depend on us for everything. Mm-hmm. As they start to get older and those hormones start to happen and things start to change, they start turning to more of what's going on in the world around them.
Right.
So they look at that. And so we as parents, you're absolutely right. That is the time when we need to figure out how can we pull them closer versus farther away. How can we start to have those conversations with them so that they eventually, when they start to get even older, 15, 16, they can feel comfortable having those conversations with us. Mm-hmm. And so how do we do that balancing act? Because that's really what it is. We're a parent, we have to hold the line. We have what we expect in our homes and what we don't. But then we also have this in-between stage, they call it the tweens, right? The in-between stage where they're like not a teenager, but then they're just a teenager and they have all these emotions. And so they have these mood swings and we want to be respected as parents, right? But we have to realize that them too, they also want to be respected. So, and then when we look at nowadays in regards to what the social problems they're dealing with, according to parentology, they're really looking at like acceptance, like where do I fit in this world, right? I mean, yeah, I get it. I'm the daughter of, and I'm the son of, but who am I, right? So trying to figure out how they can be accepted. And then also it's important for us as parents, and when they're looking at it and they're trying to figure out how they can be accepted, how do we show them that we have that unconditional love for them? Right. And regardless, we're gonna love them. And how do we figure that out? And that's something we have to kind of try to maneuver. They also have like their own stress, because as they continue as teenagers, they're trying to figure out, okay, this school thing, especially they hit middle school, 12, 13 years old.
Listen.
Now they're in middle school and they're like, okay, I have 6 and 7 classes. I want to be in the band, or I want to do the play, or I want to be a part of this group, right? Because I want to be a part, going back to figuring out that acceptance piece. So now I want to be part of this, but how do I manage all that? And then they start to become overwhelmed and stressed.
Yes.
So some of our kids do it really well, right?
Some of them, yes.
Other kids, is a struggle, and it's really hard. And so we have to be aware of that as well.
Right. And I think at that time is where we start feeling that strain on the relationship, where we're like you said, we're trying to find the balance, toe the line. Like I want to be, I am your parent, but I also want to be that parent that understands that you are going through some things. So when we're looking at the top social problems teens face today, what are some things that you can offer to our community to put into their healing? Because this is a tool in your healing box that not only applies to you individually, but applies to your child. So what kind of things can they do to even begin to recognize, okay, that's a top social problem that teens are going through, even though it doesn't fit with how I want my household to run? I have to realize that this is a standard problem for a tween or a teen. This is how I should handle it.
Right. Yeah. And so some of the things that we always want to do is we want to make sure that we're paying attention, because other social problems that our youth deal with are anxiety and depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
They deal with bullying. That's been a big thing over the past decade. And so how can we make sure that we as parents are paying attention? So sometimes it's a matter of, we know how busy we get. We're all trying to work, to make sure that the needs are met. But how can we find that time to attend that one back to school night, right? And we all know back to school night is usually the same all the time, right? But that we fail to realize how important that is for our child. They get excited to know that you're interested in what they're learning in school. We can do a lot more listening and paying attention. We know social media is out there, and we definitely don't want social media to be the parent of our children.
Correct.
Because they're getting a lot of desensitization, right? They're seeing and hearing a lot of things that I can say for myself, when I was young, we didn't have that. I like to tell my kids, back in the day, we didn't have cell phones. And if you did, you had to pay hundreds of dollars to get one. So that was an option. And then to get it, so instant access on our phones.
Or it wasn't smart. It was the flip phone thing that had like the greenish, grayish screen and did much of nothing.
So we as parents in this age are dealing with something different that we didn't have to deal with, that our parents didn't have to deal with, and their parents didn't have to deal with. So we're trying to figure out this new age of our kids are being desensitized to a lot of stuff that was not even talked about, when we were that age. And so it's a lot of listening. It's a lot of paying attention. It's making sure that you're having those conversations first. Now I understand when we get that our kids hear one thing and goes in one ear and out the other. But what I have learned over the years, not as a parent, but as a professional in the field, is that you are planting those seeds. They do hear what you're saying, as much as they ignore us and they're like, whatever, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what I'm going through. It's different. That was when you were younger, right? And you're like, no, but so they do hear it. So to keep those communication lines open. Now, I know a thing that can be difficult for us as parents, because we talked a little bit earlier about the need for, we want our children to respect us. Yeah. So I know back in my day, you were seen and not heard.
Correct.
Right? But we have learned over the years that that's not necessarily the best way, because that's how secrets happen.
It's how secrets happen. It's how trauma is not, it's how trauma becomes more chronic and it stays around, as opposed to just being a situation. It just becomes a lifelong thing, like communication, that's a good tool to hold on to.
It's so important. And yeah, it's so important. And so I encourage my families, I encourage even myself to be able to apologize to your kids when you're wrong. Say like, I am so sorry.
Yes.
I think and it starts when they're young. And obviously a lot of people that are on here probably have teenagers now, and we're in this pandemic and they're stuck in the house and they're like, I need to know what to do now because you have been in the house for 4 months. You know,
and I need us all to come out alive.
Right. You know, communication is key. And when you have teachers that don't want to talk to you, and so the tools that you can use is asking them to tell you a story, right? Like we're going through a lot of stuff right now that I will reach out to my kids and I'll be like, how are you doing? Well, we know how you doing, or how was school is going to get you an answer of, it was fine. I'm okay.
Yeah.
It's not going to get you the answer you want.
No.
And so I have found it successful to say, well, when you become an adult and have like your own kids, or you have your nieces or your nephews, tell me what you're going to tell them about this experience, about this pandemic, about these current protests that are going on. What are you going to tell them? Because that's going to give you insight to their experience and what's going on for them right then, right? You just have to find another way to ask the questions to get the answers that you want.
So we need to practice with open-ended questions, which does not give them an opportunity to say yes, no, fine, or anything else like that. You know, trying to get them to go into detail, to feel comfortable holding those conversations with you. It's a struggle. I have to tell you, it's a struggle because especially if you have a child who does not like to share, right?
Right.
I mean, it's a struggle and it becomes frustrating and you're just like, all I did was ask you to tell me a story. That's all I asked, child. That's it. So there is going to be pushback. So there is the other side to that they're not there. But the one thing I can tell you is that don't stop. Even if they're just like, they give you the eye roll or they give you the hum or the haw or the huffing and the puffing because they really don't want to talk about it. If you just stay consistent, they're going to know when they're ready that you're going to be there and that you haven't walked away, even if they're pushing away.
Right. And allow yourself to be, and this kind of goes into some other things we'll talk about a little bit later, but allow yourself to be vulnerable.
Oh,
that's one of the biggest things, to allow yourself to be vulnerable. My kids think I'm absolutely insane, and I'm totally okay with that because I'll be like, well, I don't know what that means. Tell me. But that's a teachable moment for them to teach you, to take ownership of something. You don't have, as a parent, you don't have to have all the answers. Parenting doesn't come with a book anyway. So why not let your team teach you something?
Right. And that also goes to right here, building the parental and teen relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like being vulnerable, having those conversations, being open to learn. I know when I make a mistake, like you said, I started very early with my son, just saying I was wrong. And I have to tell you that a lot of people in my family would be like, he's a child. Like, you don't have to say that you were wrong. But yes, I do. One, it teaches accountability. And two, it shows that, yes, I'm your parent, but I make mistakes too.
Right.
And I'm human and I'm here for you because I'm still learning from you.
Right. Absolutely. And building that relationship too, you have to, I talked about making time going to some of their school events or whatever, but even like old school board games, right?
Yes.
They don't want to do it. It's okay. We're going to do it anyway. Because at the end of the day, they're going to still enjoy it, right? Because that's a lot of what we grew up on. It was the Monopoly, you know, the Scrabble, the Life, all those different things. And so encouraging that kind of play to engage, because you'll be surprised at what conversations happen over old school board games and family movie time, right? Family movie time. Let's pick a movie. Let's watch a movie. those two are so impactful. And those are the memories that you're building with your children. And they'll be like a couple months later, or remember last summer when such and such and such and such, and you're playing when this happened.
So I want to go to the other side of that. For, let's say that the relationship is already strained and we have parents who are wanting to repair that relationship, right? I mean, and they're listening to us and they're just like, I can't do that, because we're not even at the level where we can have that kind of conversation without it becoming extreme, right? Just extreme disagreement. So when we're looking at that and we're looking at some of the people in our community who are dealing with that, how do those parents begin to repair and build that relationship?
Obviously, if they need support and help, they need to be okay with speaking out and asking for help. I think that is a huge thing that we typically don't do. Especially, I say we, especially in the African American culture, we don't necessarily ask for help. But I think that that's so important to get that support and help. But start small, right? Start small. Don't think you have to go in and be like, okay, they said I'm going to go and ask you and have you tell me a story. Or they said, okay, let's pull out the game and we're going to do this and we're going to have a game. Like, no, start small. Maybe having more frequent just check-ins. Right, where if you're, especially during the pandemic, you're in the house, you're together, just kind of checking in. Everybody, not always the whole day in their own space, even if it's just coming together in the same space. And everybody might have video game, okay,
right?
Some people might have video games, some people might be on the phone, but bring everybody together in that same space, right? Start small, because as parents, like I said, we talked about social media. We too are parenting different than our parents just because we have access to social media.
Right.
So we are not as attentive as we need to be.
Right.
Well, right. So we have to practice it too in order to be successful with our own children.
And that's the thing too. Like, the age of social media has pulled us away, because we have instant access to like news and we're able to stay up to date by the second, and a lot of our attention is drawn away. And so there's many times that your child might withdraw and you not know that the child is withdrawal because our attention is somewhere else. And that also probably goes back to understanding the basic needs to parenting a teen.
Right. So when we talk about the basic needs, we all know that everybody needs food, shelter, clothing, right? That's what we work for. That's what we go to work for. That's what we give us, so we can provide those things.
And legally, that's all that's required, right?
Right? That's required. And that's when we're like, okay, well, we need to do this. And we work really hard. And so we get all their basic needs, right? Food, clothes, and shelter. And then we get them their wants, right? Oh, I need this new video game, or I need this new app, or I need this, right? But I think one of the pieces that a lot of people do not consider when they think about and look at basic needs is that emotional need, right? That we never talk about that. But we know as human beings, there is an emotional need that is a basic need. So we cannot, that's one part that we cannot ignore, because when we go back and talk about the development and all the different emotions that are going on and that they're finding themselves and they're trying to have acceptance, and they have all these outside sources that are feeding them with all of these things, they need to have a place where they know that their emotional needs are met. And those go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was saying those emotional needs, yes, is a conversation and showing the unconditional love and all of these, but it could also be something very basic as just like a hug, right? Our teenagers get bigger, and then a lot of times we don't even give them that hug. But when they were really little, it was like, oh, and they're so excited to see you, and you're giving them that hug, right? So, but that goes also back to paying attention. I try to pay attention, and I always encourage my families to pay attention to any types of changes in behaviors and moods and emotions, because it's already hard to find it because they're going through all these different moods.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell for myself as a parent when my daughter is struggling, and I'll just look at her and I'll say, I'll ask her what's wrong. She'll tell me nothing, or I don't know, right?
Yeah.
She'll say nothing, or I don't know.
Basic answer.
And I'll look at her and I say, do you need a hug? And she'll look at me, and then that's when you can see all of the emotions just in her body.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what's needed. She needs that emotional security. So really just looking at what feeds your teen's emotional needs, because that emotional need is going to help feed all those other pieces.
And so when we say be aware of the emotions, maybe something happened and they're having they're unstable as teens ebbs and flow of situations go, right? We as parents sometimes we look at the behaviors as just them being oppositional or defiant.
Right.
But there may be that underlining emotion or feeling that they cannot express and or explain. And therefore, that's why it's like, okay, let's make sure we're tending to their emotional needs. Because if I ask you to do something and you give me like I just asked you to, I don't know, go walk the moon, and it's impossible. I'm trying to understand what's going on as a parent with my child, because growing up, like you said, we grew up in that time where it's like children are seen and not heard, and what I say goes. There's no question behind it. Just go ahead and move and do it quickly, please, because I don't want to have to say it again. But as my child was growing up, I would actually go to him because I'm like, nobody attended to my emotional needs very closely when I was growing up. Yeah. That made me become hypersensitive to the fact that I didn't want that to happen to my child, right? So we would have conversations and I would sit down with him, and sometimes he would give me half answers, but I tell him I'm not moving until he actually gives me a real sentence.
Yeah, you bring up a really great point, because that's so important. One of the things when I have an intake with a family, that's one of the things that because they'll come, families, we come in, and especially if we get the courage to ask for help, now it's like, okay, and they do this and they do this and they do this and this and fix it. Right? That's what you need to fix it. And they bring all that in. And one of the places that I take my families always back to is really thinking about, okay, well, let's think about when you were 15, when you were 16. Let's talk about that a little bit. I get it. We're here to talk about Tracie. But right now, I want to talk about when you were 15 and 16. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And that really helps to bring them to a point of realizing, oh, well, yeah, I did this. And I did that, and I did that. And then it's like, okay. And so then now let's talk about what did you need in that moment?
Right.
What was that trigger that you had that behavior? What was behind that?
Right.
Oh, well, because my parents were never home, and so I was bored. Or because I felt like I wasn't being paid attention to, and I needed to get some kind of attention, negative or positive. I just needed attention. Right? So it's so important for us as parents when we're struggling with our teens to go back to that place. Going back to, okay, when I was this age, what was going on for me? What did I need? What did I want? And that usually brings in that, okay, I have a little bit of empathy now for my child, because I get it. But we forget that. We forget that we were that age at one point in time too, and we did some things, and we think about the things that we did, but we don't always think about the reasons why we did those. And so I try to get our families to the point where they think about what was the reason behind them, because nobody just does something. There's a reason behind that. And when they get to that reason, then they're able to understand more in regards to what their child may be struggling with.
Right. And that also is actually, I believe, a key to actually beginning to heal fractured relationships. Because like you were saying, sometimes they just want to be understood. right? They just want to be understood, and they just want to know that someone is listening. Now here's this, and I always have to play the advocate aspect at one point or another. But there are parents who are giving their all. There are parents who are doing these exact things, and what they're receiving is still pushback from that child, which actually puts a enormous strain on the relationship. So there are parents out there who's doing everything we say. They're checking in, they're having conversations, they're saying, tell me a story. They're doing everything that just feels like it's natural to do to try and draw closer to their child. And even some who have sought help, and they're still at that point where it doesn't seem to be working. What would you tell them?
I would tell them, don't give up and take it one day at a time. Because we have to think about, if you think about, I'd like to think about when I got my first car. When I got my first car, I didn't pay for it. So I didn't appreciate it, right? It was just like, okay, I got a car, I'm a teen, it was a little bucket, but it got me from point A to point B.
Yes.
But when I had to buy my own, it had a bigger impact. It made a big difference. And I realized, oh, wow. Okay, I have car insurance, I have these payments, I have all these different things. So then I respected it a little bit more, and I was like, oh my gosh, my parents sacrificed all this just so I could have a car so I could get to my basketball practices,
Right.
Very basic. So I always tell parents to stay encouraged. Don't give up. You will eventually get to that breaking point. If you keep those lines of communication open, you have to communicate. You have to also give your children the opportunity to be independent. Sometimes we live and learn, right? Sometimes we learn from experiences. And as parents, we never want our kids to have to learn that way. We want to tell them, we want to prevent any harm. We want to say, no, you don't want to do because of this, and this is going to happen. And of course, they're like, no, it's cool. I'm going to be okay.
That goes back to them trying to find themselves as well, right? Because many parents will say, I went through that, so you don't have to go through that, right? But it's not the same. Like, your experience and the times are different. So how one would experience it and handle it is totally different than we as parents had to experience it and handle it. And we can tell them all day long, but children, teens especially, they're hands-on learners. You can tell them all day, and they'll be like, okay, yeah, I understand that. Okay, this is why I shouldn't do that. And then they're like, after they experience it, like you said, after you had to purchase your own car, you're like, oh, okay, I have a deeper and better understanding, and it means more because it's their own experience, it's their own journey. And in a world we live in today, as parents, we're very helicopter-ish.
We like to save our kids.
We like to save them, and we want to make sure that they're safe because they can't even go outside and play like we did. Like, our parents be like, go outside and play in the front yard in the gate that wasn't locked, that anybody could jump over, and just go out there and be out there all day. And now we can't even do that for our children. Really, it doesn't feel safe in my opinion.
Yeah, but I think it's important for us to still, as we foster as parents the need for communication with our parents, I think it's still important for us to encourage our children to, it might be a school teacher, somebody that still have that, be able to have a trusted adult to have that conversation with, because we don't want them to have the conversation with their peers who are learning just as much as they are. And we would hope that trusted adult will call us as parents and say, hey, so-and-so's really struggling in this area. Now for parents, what I can say is that there is hope, right? Your hardest years are your 10 to 14 years old. Those are your hardest years. They're very impulsive. They're very reactive. As they start to get older, their world starts to make sense for them. And I'm not saying that the behaviors go away, but they're not as impulsive, right? They're not as impulsive. They're thinking twice before they do something. And even if they're going to do a behavior, they have to get a little bit more creative to get away with it, because
we're not accepting those "oops, I didn't know" kind of situations anymore. So they have to think deeper about it, right? Listen, I have to tell you, but it's funny that I love that age range, right? I love my 10 to 16, 17-year-olds. That is just because I feel like I can be extra real with them.
But you're so brave, because 14 and a half is probably the youngest. And the reason why I say that 14 and a half and older, and the reason why I say that, and a piece that nobody wants to talk about that we didn't talk about, is that 10 to 14-year-old range, because their emotions are so much going back and forth, because they're trying to find themselves so much. That is the highest risk age. That is
for this right here.
Highest risk of suicides. Because one, they're trying to find acceptance. Two, that lack of impulse control. Right. 3, not being to understand like their purpose in life and why they're here, and that you don't get to come back from suicide. It's a permanent thing, right? Because remember, we talked about, we always see the physical, but we don't really see all the cognitive development stuff. And cognitive, they may look physically there, but cognitively they're not there, and they're still developing. And so that is the highest risk for suicide. If we look at suicide rate, and we look at from like 2000 to 2007, our rates were going lower, decreasing as social media continued to increase. We get about 2008, the rates were increasing, and unfortunately they continue to increase now that we're in 2020. So in 2020, they continue to increase.
2020 has been the year for a whole bunch of increase.
Well, there's a lot. How about from 2008 to 2019? Let's not even talk about 2020. That could be a whole chapter in itself.
Right, but we have seen these numbers rise because there is that extra level of stress. There is that extra level of stress in the home. There is that extra level of strain because a relationship that wasn't healthy to begin with, and now you have no choice but
to be with it. And you don't have those social pieces, right? Because our teens thrive on that social piece, because remember, although it causes them stress, they want to have that social life. They want to be involved. They want to be active, because that's part of them figuring out who they are. But that's their highest risk. Also, 15 to 19-year-olds, they have a really high rate too. But definitely not as high as the 10 to 14-year-olds. So you said those are your favorites, and that's what I said. You are.
I love it. It's my favorite because I believe, as we talked about planting seeds, that is the time where you're planting the most seeds. You're talking about social relationships. You're talking about how to be, a good part of the active citizen in your community. And I mean, there's so many other. So let me tell you, to be quite honest, anything before 10 is just not it. Although I like questions, I think there's quite too many. And then no matter how many times you answer them, it's still not enough. So we're going to fast forward to 10 and older, where if they're asking a question, unless they're not paying attention, which 9 times out of 10, they're really not the first time, but that seed is still being planted, right? And you're able to begin to see the things that they like and begin to pull those things out and foster positive outcomes for them. So those years are super fun for me. And to be quite honest, if I can just skip up to like 12 and older, absolutely. And teenage girls, because in our communities, and this is where it becomes important in the home, because in our community, we don't have enough resources for that age group. we're like super lacking, which also explains why the rate for suicide is more than likely higher in that range too, is because we lose community support, a lot of it at that age. And so as parents, building relationships and healing relationships means being attentive.
Yes, I would agree. And what I can say in my defense of my preferring 14 and a half and older is that in the 10 to 14 year range, that is definitely a prime opportunity to teach them those positive coping skills.
Right.
So, because like you said, you're figuring out what they like and what they don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a prime opportunity to teach them those skills. Because the one thing about once they hit about 15 years old, they know what they like, they know what they don't like, and they may not always have those coping skills. And so then you do have to work a little bit backwards.
Yeah.
Teach them, well, here's what you do when you become frustrated and upset. Here's what you do to self-soothe when you're feeling anxious. Here's what you do when you're starting to feel a little bit sad. So you do have to kind of go backwards a little bit. So I can say that the 10 to 14 age is a perfect age to really drill in those coping skills.
Right. And it definitely is that early intervention and prevention stage, which is what I love to focus on. Because again, they're just now finding themselves, and even when things go wrong, they can bounce back and you can help them do well, which leads me to this right here. Parenting during hard times right now is one of the hardest times probably to parent, because parents are not only feeling the stress, anxieties, and so forth of the children, right? Because like you said, they want to be out, they can't be with their friends, many miss graduation, many can't do the things that they want to do, but the parents are also dealing with their own personal situations, whatever that may be. So how do we help them build tools to fill their healing box in order to successfully parent during hard times?
I think and I can say I think because I think we're all figuring it out, mm-hmm. right? At the same time, we're all trying to figure out this piece of, some of us are able to work at home, but then like we're trying to parent at the same time. Mm-hmm. Definitely when school was in, we're trying to be teachers on top of, we're supposed to be in a Zoom call, right? And then we are like, okay, the day is done. And now it's time to cook dinner. And so right. What I say as parents, we, in these situations, for these tough times, and those who may have been able to work from home, we have to figure out how we can separate the two, right? When we think of our home, we think of it as our safe haven, protected. You know, they always say leave work at work and home at home, and now things are kind of blended.
Yes.
So how do we separate the two? So having some very strict guidelines for yourself, right? Okay, at this time, I'm done. And here's what happens, what happens next. I talked a little bit about the board games, things like that, but sometimes maybe just tell your parent, let's go outside, let's go for a bike ride. Let's go bike riding,
Right.
I just did that yesterday. I hadn't been on a bike in like 12 years, like a long time.
And you good?
No, I did not. No, I did not. I maybe, did. But in this time, I've also found like, okay, well, when I was younger and we didn't have like the financial means to go anywhere or do anything, what did we do? Like and I've taken my kids to go feed the ducks at the park. Like, yes. I hadn't did that since I was maybe like 10 years old.
Yes.
And surprisingly, my 15-year-old, quote me, I'm telling you, my 15-year-old had an amazing time. And my 12-year-old. And I was like, oh, look at that. Like, they really had a good time.
It's building memories, oh my, mm-hmm. that are priceless. One thing that I think I would add to that is it's okay to take me time.
I agree.
It's okay, and it's not selfish. Like, yes, we want to disconnect but we still want to be that parent that's there, that parent who's like, hey, if you need me, I'm here, tap in, right? I'm going to tap in if you need me. Don't hesitate. But you, like you said, you have to set those boundaries because you can't give from an empty cup.
Right. And I absolutely. And I encourage that. And obviously when we weren't in a pandemic, I encourage families to do that. Even for myself, I have my me time, right? I have my spa days that I might go have a massage. I have my days where I might just go have a lunch for the pandemic, with a couple friends. And it doesn't mean that you're being a bad parent or you're not giving your all, right? But it's okay that every couple weeks or once a month that you have that time for you, even just as like read a book. If you're like, oh, I used to love reading, and then when I had kids I can't read, well, schedule it. And I tell, even when I'm having my fitness hat on and I talk to my clients in that aspect, I tell them you schedule this time as if you schedule a meeting at work.
Yes.
You're not going to miss a meeting at work, so why are you going to miss
taking care of you?
Right? Why are you going to miss going for that walk? Why are you going to miss doing the massage or whatever? You schedule it, and it should be just as important as a meeting at work, as your kids' parent-teacher conference. It should hold that same importance.
And it also, going back to building and healing relationships, if we are broken, we can't expect to heal the relationship between us and our children.
Right.
We just can't. And so no matter what I talk about, I always go back to self-care, because I can't even express the importance of, let me tell you, if I was to operate on an empty cup, which I honestly just have to be honest, sometimes I have, and it has not been the best experience. It's not the best experience for me. It's not the best experience for the people that I am trying to deal with, i.e. husband and son. And it's just not, because you withdraw at times when you really don't want to. So part of having healthy relationships with your children is making sure that you are mentally, physically, spiritually okay.
I agree. I definitely agree. And if you happen to be in a situation where you are having to continue to parent when your cup is empty, and you go and you do your self-care and you now have it half full or full, you need to also be insightful enough to be able to recognize and go back and to have those conversations and apologize to those people around you.
Yes.
So that you can continue to heal that relationship.
Right. That is correct. Apologies are key. And I don't know, just don't be afraid to do that. Our children actually appreciate it, and it just helps the growth of what we're trying to do move forward. I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions. We do have a few comments, definitely in agreement with the fact that telling parents to think back to when they were children is very helpful. Miss Karen said that it encourages self-awareness, and hopefully that can create empathy and compassion for our children and ourselves. But I believe it also teaches empathy and compassion for, our children and ourselves. And yes, Karen, building memories is very priceless. You can't put a price on that for your children.
Yes.
Did I miss anything, Miss Tracie? No. I think we covered everything that we planned to speak on tonight. And if no one has questions, I would love to invite you to get in contact with with Tracie, if you are in that situation where you want to work on your relationship with your children and you you feel stuck, or if you just want further information, this is her contact information so that you can reach out and really begin that process. What do they need to do? What would you be able to offer them once they reached out to you?
Right. So currently, because of the pandemic, I am facilitating and doing telehealth. One of the things I didn't mention in my introduction is I've actually had my own private practice, a small practice, because I do still work in the community full time since 2010. And so they would just need to call. I have several insurance panels that I'm actually on and accept private insurance. And then I also have take a fee for service. And I also offer a sliding fee scale based on what some of the needs may be.
Okay.
So there is definitely flexibility there. I was doing a group before the pandemic for our adolescent girls in partnership with a couple other clinicians. But ultimately, individual at this point in time, family at this point in time, group hopefully will be reinitiated once we figure out this pandemic situation. Because I do, and I love the groups as well, because I think it's so important for our youth to have a safe space where they can talk, but where they can be with other peers who have similar things going on for them. In our groups, we do screenings and we screen to make sure we're matching the most appropriate youth together with similar experiences. But I think that's important too, especially if they're an only child or they're struggling with their sibling relationships. It gives them an opportunity to come somewhere where they have peers, there's a commonality, but then they also have facilitators to really make sure they're staying safe and providing those positive coping skills and helping them gain those insights.
That is amazing. Yay. I love the fact that this is a resource in the community that many people probably do not know exist. And now we're just beginning to build our network of individuals, everyone, or providers everyone can get in contact with, depending on the level of their need or what their need is. Hold on. There was a question here. How different is your advice for fostering positive relationships with married adult children compared to teenagers? That's a good question.
That's a great question. And I think, and we think teenage parenting is difficult. I think parenting adult children is difficult as well, because it gets tricky, because you have these people that to you will always be little people, right? Because they're your child. But in reality, they are adults. And so what I have found is most successful is ultimately our adult children. We have to let them live their lives because they are adults. But being, once again, that listening ear, being available, doing those check-ins. A lot of times we may expect our children to check on us because we're older, right? And we're like, oh, my daughter or my son needs to check on me. But we can check on them too and just say, hey, I'm just checking in. How are things going? What's new? Right? Because they may be having job experiences, relationship experiences, goals that they want to figure out, but they don't know how to figure it out, right? Or they may be struggling and they may not tell you, especially in between that 19 to 23 age. They're not going to really tell you, that they're struggling and that they're having to work 2 and 3 jobs to pay their rent, because they feel like mom and dad did so much, or mom did so much, or dad did so much for me that I don't want to be a burden. And so you have to, as the parent, have to open that door, because during that age, they're really not going to open that door. They're trying to figure out life on their own. They're trying to have that independence. They're trying to not be, a burden.
Now, I would also say there might be those who take advantage of the fact that they will always be your baby, right?
Yes.
And they refuse to like cut the apron string, the umbilical cord, however we want to say it. They are still fully attached to the parental unit.
Yes.
And that can become stressful as well. And you want to set those boundaries without making them feel like you're pushing them away. How would someone handle that?
And so I think in those moments, especially like, for example, if they're still like living with you, I think you have to be clear on what your goals and expectations are. And then you have to communicate those. So if your goal and expectation is that I really want them to be able to be self-sufficient, I really want them to be on their own, well, then you need to have a conversation about that. And you need to set goals. And when you set goals, if you think about a job, right? You go to a job and you get your annual evaluation, you have goals that are set. And the expectation is that you meet them and they're time limited, right? So it's the same thing. You have the conversation, you get it clear, you figure out how you can help support them and what they need from you and vice versa so that they can be successful, and you set those goals and you set a timeline. I think that's probably the biggest piece that's always missed is the timeline.
Timeline.
Yes.
Meaning there is an end to this ride at one point or another.
Yes.
And if they still don't meet that timeline, it's almost like they're an adult and you have to allow them to be an adult, because it's almost until the bottom falls out, they're not going to move. But it doesn't mean that you can't be there. Some parents be like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming, I'm just gonna walk away, drop it, and just let them figure it out, right? That's not what we're saying. Right. We're saying there is a time where you have to step back and become hands off. However, and let them figure it out, but don't let them kill themselves trying to figure it out. Like, right. If you can just drop a little bit of nugget in there, here and there, like breadcrumbs, like Hansel and Gretel, let's go. Here is a breadcrumb. Come follow this, because you're out of time, but I still need you to get where you need to go.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Karen, I really hope that was helpful in answering your question. Oh, she said that was good for her, and thank you. Okay. With that said, as you know, at the end of every show, I let you know exactly what we have going on next. Our next session is July 28th, and we are going to talk about grief recovery. So we're going to have a guest on here who does grief counseling, and we're going to work our way through understanding grief past the experience of trauma. Okay. Also, for me, brand new, you guys, and I'm super excited to be bringing this to you. I am starting a series session. It is going to be a week-long session for those who sign. Month, not week. A month long, once a week, for a month, and it's titled "Understanding Your Trauma on Your Journey to Resilience." So if you're interested in learning more about that session, go ahead and contact me at the information provided right there. And we can begin talking about that. And also, I'm adding, in addition to services, healing circles for individuals and or groups, which currently will be conducted via Zoom. All of this will be conducted virtually until we can get past this pandemic, and then we would work out how that would happen in person and whatnot, or it could stay in Zoom. Until next time, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your questions. If you have further questions, please don't hesitate to contact myself, contact Tracie, because we will continue to answer these questions for you. Until next time, remember that resilience is a journey. Have a good evening.